Welcome to Garden Wise Adventures. My name is Malie and I'm really excited. Today I'm here with Trent and you are, now you're the, well tell me who you are.
I'm the city arborist. I've been here for about 3.5 years.
In Herriman, right?
In Herriman, yeah. Prior to that I was actually a forester for 25 years. So I've done timber sales, I've done agroforestry, I've done a lot of different things. But I'm an arborist now, a city arborist, and certified through ISA, certified as a municipal specialist as well. So.
Perfect. So you're the tree guy.
I am the tree guy for Herriman City.
Yeah, tree guys are some of my favorite people because I love trees. So let's talk about trees a little bit. There's a lot of misconceptions about trees. There's misconceptions about planting and huge misconceptions about watering. I know that Utah's talking about slow the flow and turf removal rebates and reducing watering. But trees are a little bit different than lawns. So maybe we could talk a little bit about trees first and how they function and work.
Sure. Well, the trees obviously are large organisms. And where lawn roots maybe go down 3 or 4 inches, tree roots are going to go down. About 85% of them are going to be within 24 inches of the soil, but they're still going to be, 2 feet deep versus 3 or 4 inches.
So it's not like one long taproot that goes to China or something?
Generally not one long taproot. Certain species do have a long taproot, but that's important for those species. But the important thing for us in reference to our discussion is the fact that those roots are going to grow laterally. And when we're focusing on those roots, we want to focus at least on the roots out to the drip line, which is that imaginary line at the edge of the branches dropping down to the ground. So those roots are going to be probably about 24 inches deep and at least out to the drip line, if not further.
That's good to know. That is good to know. Okay.
So the other thing that's kind of a misconception when you think about roots, and you see pictures all the time, is that the roots are a mirror image of the top. And that's not really true, because
so it's not like this big bowl shape?
It's not a big bowl shape underneath, it's a flat plane.
That's really good to know. Okay. Yeah, so so now that we kind of know what the roots look like, how do you plant a tree? What is the best practices? And where are you getting this information besides being an arborist?
That's a good question. Most of a fair amount of planting information has come from personal experience. A lot of the watering information and a lot of my background information in arboriculture comes from the American National Standard, the ANSI 300. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Part 6, which is about tree planting and specifically focusing on watering from the Best Management Practices booklet that is a companion to the ANSI 300 Part 6.
So this is industry standards from people who have researched this.
Absolutely.
So this isn't just pulled out of the air somewhere.
No, it's not just my experience. This is the experience of hundreds of thousands of industry professionals over decades of experience and research and everything. So
good. You're the person I want to know this from.
This is the industry standard.
Good. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about planting trees.
Sure.
Yeah.
So when you plant a tree, the depth of that planting is probably the most critical thing that you can do. Well, first of all, timing is important. I typically don't like to plant trees when it's hot and windy like today. I like to do most of my plantings in the springtime or in the fall. One of the local cities, one of our neighbors, does all their planting in the winter, and they've been fairly successful at that.
Oh, that's good to know.
What I don't like about planting in the winter is it's hard to work with frozen soil.
Right.
So I love planting in the spring, I love planting in the fall, but as long as it's cool and moist, that's your best time for planting. When you plant the tree, you're going to either pick it up as a bare root, as a containerized, which is in the plastic pot, or as a ball and burlap. And probably containerized is the most common for most people.
Right.
So they're going to buy that container, and it's going to be a 15-gallon or a 20-gallon or a 25-gallon container. When you dig your hole, you want it to be twice the width of that container.
Okay. So
measure your diameter of your container, make sure your hole is twice that width. And what that does is allows you to kind of break up the soil in a wide bowl around your tree so that those roots have a place to grow into that softer soil. What you don't want to do is amend that soil. You don't want to bring in special highly fertile soil to put into that hole, because then those roots get used to that really amazing soil and they hit that hard pan at the edge of that bowl.
Be like, no,
and
thank you.
They just go, yep, I'm done. I'm turning around, coming back.
Now, does that also change, like how it absorbs water too?
It does change how it absorbs water. So especially if you're planting your tree in the grass, you're going to have this bowl where you've planted your tree, and what we have here in Utah is a lot of heavy clay, and heavy clay has a tendency not to drain very well. So you're going to have this light soil that's going to absorb water, and it's not going to drain out into that clay, and it's just going to fill up, and you're basically going to drown your tree.
Really good information. So don't amend the soil. Loosen it up, but don't amend it.
Loosen it up, but don't amend it.
Okay.
Yep. And the other thing is the depth. You don't want to go deeper than the crown, the root crown on your tree. And you'll see that when you take the tree out of the container, you'll see where it starts to swell a little bit. That's where you're starting to get close. What most people don't understand is that even from the nursery, your tree is going to probably be 1 inch or 2 inches too deep.
I was going to ask about that.
So yeah, once you get that out of the container, you want to scrape that back, and you might even find some fine roots growing through that soil right at the top. You can just remove those.
Yes,
You want to pull that, no, it won't hurt the tree at all. Those are called adventitious roots, and they're not really doing anything for the tree. So you want to remove those and get it down to where you find that first major root, which, you know, in a 1.5 inch or a 2 inch tree, it may be about the size of your pinky, something like that. You're looking for a major root, and that's where you want the level of the soil to be, because that's your root crown.
Good to know.
At that root crown, that's where all of the oxygen transfer occurs for your roots. So if you bury that too deep, your tree can't get oxygen. And if you fill that whole planting hole with water, your tree is not getting oxygen. So
trees need to breathe just like we do.
Trees need to breathe just like we do.
Okay.
It's another myth that trees breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen.
Really?
That's a whole different process. That's the process where trees are creating food. So the photosynthesis creates food for the tree, but the tree has to breathe just like we do. So it takes in oxygen and gets rid of carbon dioxide in the root area.
So you have to think about the roots as much as you do, or more maybe, than you do the leaves. Okay.
Absolutely. And when you plant that new tree, the one thing you want to avoid is fertilizer. Because what that fertilizer does is it stimulates the tree to put its energy into top growth, which everybody loves. Everybody wants that instant shade. They want that beautiful tree that they just planted in the ground, but it sacrifices energy that goes into root growth.
Great information.
And so that root growth is super critical, especially for those first 3 years. You want that tree to be putting its energy into root growth so that it can establish itself, and then it has the ability to put on that top growth. So, but planting depth is, like I say, 80% of the trees that I've had to remove across the city that were dead were planted too deep.
So if you're looking at a tree that maybe you've moved in and maybe it's a couple-year-old tree and you're looking at it, can you tell if it's been planted too deep?
You can. And the easiest way is when you look at the bottom of that tree, if it looks like it just goes straight down into the ground and there's no swelling, there's a good chance that's planted too deep.
Let me swing this camera
Sure.
around right here really quickly, because this tree over here, if you look carefully at it, let's see if we can get it. Sorry about the speed here. But you can see how that's flaring out, right?
Uh-huh. Oh, the one in the distance there?
The one in the distance is, so you've got a swelling at the base. But this one right here, you can't really tell on
Right,
this
one's
it's
been
lower.
removed, so it's hard to see.
It's kind of hard to see, but it almost looks like it would be like a straight up and down.
In a smaller tree, one that's only been in the ground 2 or 3 years, especially in a windy area like Herriman, that tree is going to be moving back and forth. And when you look at the ground, if it's too deep, a lot of times you'll see a gap in the soil between the edge of the soil and the base of the tree. And then you know that tree is too deep.
Now, is there anything you can do about that?
If it's too deep, some people want to just dig it up and replant it. Don't do that.
Okay,
Once it's in the ground and those roots are starting to grow, if you dig it up, it's going to go through transplant shock all over again. It's going to really stress that tree. The best thing you can do is carefully excavate the soil down to the point where you find that first major root. But do it carefully, because you can do a lot of damage to those roots if you're just randomly scraping and digging and chopping. So just kind of carefully excavate that and scrape it back away. Make sure that that root collar is exposed and that the roots aren't super deep underneath the outside of that planting hole.
Perfect. Now, what about ball and burlap?
Ball and burlap, the really critical thing about that is to make sure that you get that burlap off of there.
How much do you like to see taken off?
I like to see all of it taken off. I like to see the burlap, and I like to see the wire cage taken off. Sometimes
and the rope.
Oh, absolutely. All twine has to be removed. No questions asked. But there is some discussion about that. Even I can't think of his first name. Professor Gilman out of Florida is kind of the father of urban forestry, and he suggests, at least in Florida, that the wire cage isn't as much of an issue, especially the lower third of it, or the lower 2/3. But he does recommend removing at least the top 2/3 of the wire cage. But the burlap, especially here in Utah, is just not going to break down.
No, it's not wet.
It's going to hold your roots in, even in a soil situation where your soil is getting watered regularly and it's staying wet. That burlap, a lot of it is actually designed not to break down.
Do you have any suggestions for people who, maybe have a large tree that, how to remove the burlap without destroying the roots?
So that's the other thing. When you do remove that burlap and that wire cage, it does make it a lot harder to move that tree around, which is why a lot of them get planted with that stuff on it.
Right.
Because you've got that wire cage that your equipment can grab onto and move that. A lot of times, if your hole is twice the width of your root ball, it gives you some room to work. And I have actually just carefully rolled those trees down, because I've planted some of those by myself, and I not with equipment. And so if you're careful, and if the root ball has some moisture to it, you can carefully roll it down into that hole, and then you can kind of tip it back and cut some of it off, and then tip it the other direction and cut some of it off.
I've heard people suggest that.
So, and that's a good way to do it. You have to be careful though, because if your trees haven't been watered when you pick them up, just even rolling them into that hole can demolish the root ball, and I have had that happen. I'm just going to throw this out there. There's some companies out there that are using air pots, which are it's the plastic pot. So we didn't mention this when we talked about containerized. When you take your tree out of that container, you'll notice the roots growing in a circle around the outside edge of that. If you don't address that, those roots will continue to grow in a circle, and they will strangle your tree. So you've got to sever those and straighten them out the best that you can. But this company that developed air pots, they have little holes in the outside edge of the pot. So as those roots grow out, they hit that oxygen and they stop growing, and they form a branch. And they just continue to branch, and so they don't get that circling. They actually branch deeper. So if you can find a company that uses air pots, you're going to be way ahead of the game, I think.
So let's move on. Now that we know how to plant the trees, and we know, kind of how to make sure, best practices for planting, now comes the big thing, watering. The state of Utah is really focusing on watering, and I think it's causing some problems.
It is, and a lot of what we're seeing is people taking out their park strips, taking the grass out of their park strips, and they want to take out their trees, they want to take out everything. They're calling it xeriscaping, which it isn't. It's xeriscaping. So there's a difference. You're not taking everything out, and keeping those trees in is going to help maintain the moisture. It's going to help having that shade is going to help maintain water. But it's important to water those trees correctly, because grass and trees need different watering regimes. As we mentioned before, grass has a fairly shallow root system. So your grass wants to be watered regularly, and it wants to be, you can get by with watering it lightly on a regular basis. Trees actually prefer to be watered less frequently, but much deeper. So, and one thing that we have found, some of the research has shown that grass watering systems, lawn watering systems, have a tendency to actually overwater young trees, because, as we mentioned, you've got that bowl full of loose material, and in the case of a containerized tree, it's got that really fine soil, and that's just going to soak up all that water that is going into the grass, and it just stays in that bowl, and you can overwater trees. So
yeah, okay, so that's a good thing to know, because a lot of people think about underwatering trees rather than overwatering trees.
And everybody thinks more is always better, but honestly, we have a bigger issue with overwatering our trees here than we do underwatering.
Imagine those little trees being held underwater, struggling to breathe.
Needing that oxygen and not getting it. Right.
So how do you know if you've overwatered a tree?
Honestly, overwatering symptoms look very similar to underwatering. And the best thing you can do is check your soil. So
how do you check your soil?
You could, if you happen to have a soil probe, which we have over here, that's a good way to do it. If you don't, so this is a soil probe. It looks like it's probably about, what, 18 or 20 inches?
Yeah.
So that's probably about the right depth for a tree. If your soil is moist, you'll be able to push that down into the soil, unless it's rocky like it is here in Herriman. You can hit a rock and not be able to go any deeper. But if your soil is dry, you won't be able to get this into the soil at all. But you can see it has a little cutout here, so you push this down into the soil as far as you can get it, and you can kind of wiggle it around, and when you pull it out, you'll have a little soil profile that you can look at, and you can see how moist that soil is or how dry it is.
Okay, yeah, so now I just wanted to give this a little, introduction.
Sure.
I don't know if I'm right or what, what we're going to find, but if you notice this tree, it's an Australian pine, right? And it's looking okay, but then you look at this other one over here,
which is a Scotch pine,
and it's not looking so hot.
Right.
But you look at the grass over there, the grass is nice and green, and then you look at the grass here, and it's looking like there might be an irrigation issue. Now, I've had enough experience to know that sometimes it looks like there's an irrigation issue when there really actually isn't, or maybe it looks like there isn't and there actually is. Sure. So can you demonstrate how you would kind of look at that and see what's going on with the soil probe?
I'll give it a try.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to find anything, but we can kind of check and see.
So you just want to take your probe, and well, that does seem kind of dry. Oh, there we go. And it could be too, being this close to the tree, we might be getting close to roots or something like that.
But you can do this in several different areas.
Right.
It doesn't have to be just one area, right?
So that actually looks pretty well. It's moist, but it's not saturated. So
this could be, and so this is drier soil.
It's a little bit dry. Well, I won't say it's dry because you can feel it's got some moisture in it, but it's not saturated.
Right.
Which is exactly what you're looking for with your tree. You don't want the soil to be saturated because then the roots can't get that oxygen.
Let's go look at the other tree.
Sure. That's quite a lot more moist.
Oh, yeah. And it feels like almost a different texture even. Maybe it's just that it's more wet.
Yeah. Yeah, could be. That's definitely pretty wet.
And we can't for sure say that's what's causing the issue, right?
No. And so this is interesting too. You can see down here you start to hit that hard clay.
Oh wow. Yeah, totally different. I don't know if you can see maybe we can move to the section.
It's a different color.
Yeah, so
and a different texture, different consistency.
So that is definitely like native clay, and it looks like it's like decomposed material and mulch and whatever that's been on the top.
Right.
Very interesting, because we didn't see that in the other one.
Well, I didn't get that far in the other one. And if you don't, go ahead.
So that's just like one piece of the puzzle there.
Right. And if you don't have a soil probe, which you probably won't, you can use a long-handled screwdriver or any kind of a long piece of metal, stick it down in the ground, and if you can't get it in, then it's probably a little bit too dry, or like I say, you might have just really rocky soil. Yeah. When you pull it out, if you feel suction or hear suction, you know that soil is saturated. So if it'll go in relatively easy and come out relatively easy and feel cool to the touch, you know your soil is probably about at the right consistency for water. And so when you're watering your tree, you want to get it good and wet, water it deep, and then let it sit for a while until it gets kind of that drier soil under the tree on the other side. That's about that point where you might want to start thinking about watering again. When it starts to get a little bit dry, you don't want it to get completely dry because then that'll damage the roots. But when it starts to dry out a little bit, and it kind of feels like it's got that texture where it's kind of crumbly but still has some moisture in it, that's when you want to water again. So water deep, water infrequent, let it drain out a little bit. You definitely don't want to water again when the soil is saturated. So that being said, young trees are going to need more frequent watering than established mature trees. Typically, I guess all other things aside, let's say your tree is not planted in the grass. If it's got its own watering system and it's just got mulch underneath it and no, it's not competing with the lawn, you might want to give it 10 or 15 gallons, maybe twice a week.
Oh wow, okay, that's good to know.
And again, that's going to depend too on your soil conditions. It's going to depend on the temperature. Here in Utah, where things are really dry, a little more frequent watering is going to be a good thing. Certain places back east where the moisture is not such an issue, you probably don't have to water that much, but we really are hot and dry here. And even your established trees, I guess that's another one of those misconceptions, is that established trees don't need additional water because they can just get it from the rain or the snow or whatever. Here in Utah, that's not the case.
Talk about the difference between, like, you know, so for example, a lot of people say don't plant trees in the lawns.
Sure.
Is there any reason for that? Can they survive in lawns?
So they can survive in the lawns. The reasoning for that is because it's much harder to set up a separate tree watering system from your grass watering system. And most people plant their tree in the grass and then they water the grass. And so the tree either gets overwatered because it's a young tree with that big bowl that's filling up with water, or it gets underwatered because the roots because the water's not getting down to that 24-inch level on the roots. So it's really difficult to set up an ideal situation that's going to water your grass and your trees at the same time.
Okay, so do you suggest, if the tree, you know, if you've done your test and it looks like possibly that your tree is drying out in the lawn, do you suggest supplemental watering?
Absolutely. So if you check your tree, if it's in the lawn and you check it and it's dry out underneath, say, the drip line, and it's dry there, you're not getting water past 4 or 5 inches, you definitely should supplemental water, and you want to go nice and slow. If you need to, take your hose out, set it on kind of a low drip and let it sit for an hour. Then come out and move it to another spot and let it sit for an hour, and then move it to another spot if you have that capability. If you don't have it, I mean, if you've got like a drip system, you can put it around the tree. You want it to be basically around that drip line if you can. And
you can't set it when the tree is young and then leave it forever.
Right. So and this is an area where I don't have a lot of expertise, but if there's a way to expand that so that it can continue to follow that drip line, that's going to be much better for your tree than just keeping it around that small little tree circle there. So.
Now, you told me about a tree that you've been taking care of by hand watering. Can we go look at that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's head over and look at that.
Okay.
Okay, now I'm a tree person and I love trees. And when I saw this tree, it made my heart jump with joy. What is this?
So this is a giant sequoia. And this is, it's one of my favorite trees in the city. And I had a friend point it out to me after I started the job. Someone from the State Division of Forestry, Fire and State Lands came down to visit, and he said, "Oh, look at those giant sequoias." And I went, "Oh." Wow. So, but he pointed out to me that they were starting to brown up a little bit, which is a sign of winter injury. And as you can see, this is a spot where the trees are not planted in the grass. They have their own watering system, but this watering system has not been turned on for long before I started this job. So it's part of that concept that once trees are established, they don't need moisture or they don't need supplemental water. But as you can see, you know, and partly because it's a giant sequoia and they need a lot of extra water. As you can see, it's been browning up. It's had, with the winters of what, 2021 and 21-22, where we had almost no snow.
Right.
Evergreens are particularly susceptible to winters with no snow because they stay green all year long, so they're passing water from the roots up through the leaves all winter long. So if there's no snow on the ground to replenish that moisture, they're going to dry out significantly. So you've probably seen that if you've looked at any of the evergreens around northern Utah this year.
They're all struggling heavily.
Really struggling. Or they were going into the beginning of the summer. And with all the moisture that we had this winter, to be honest, at the beginning of the summer, I was a little surprised at how badly they all looked. But there is kind of a lag time with trees. So
talk about that, because that's very, very important.
yeah, so it takes time because a tree is a large organism, and it takes time to move water from the roots to the branches, and it takes time for that tree to manifest symptoms of insect or disease. It takes time for it to manifest any kind of a change in the environment. So after those last 2 really bad winters, coming out of this winter, I was a little bit surprised because we had so much moisture and they looked terrible at the beginning of the summer. But as you can see, this tree has put on a lot of new green.
Yeah, I was noticing this little growth down here.
Oh yeah, for sure. So this tree has not gotten supplemental water for several years, but when my friend pointed it out to me and he said, look, it's browning up, but that'll green up if it gets water. So knowing that the watering system in here is non-functional, I've been coming in and hand watering this tree in particular.
So how do you hand water a tree this size?
Actually, if you'll come over here and take a look at my truck, there's a lot of junk in the back of my truck, but in particular, there's a 120-gallon tank in the back of my truck.
Oh.
So I fill that up, and I actually have just a little electric pump, and I run a 50-foot hose from that tank and bring it out here, and I just hand water this tree. So once a week, I come out here, and I try to give it about 60 gallons because it's a sequoia, it's a fairly large tree, and it's not getting anything from grass or anything else. So I'll take the hose and I'll set it right here, and I'll let it run for a while, and then I'll move it over here and I'll let it run for a while, and then I'll move it over here, and I try to keep it right around the drip line on the upper end because it's going to flow down. On the lower end, I actually put it closer to the tree because I know that's going to work its way down the hill.
Okay.
So, and I'll just water it, like I say, and I'll watch the tank until it's down to about 60 gallons. And the other trees, they're doing okay. They looked really bad last year, but with the water we had this year, and actually we added all of this mulch, I think about a year ago. So we covered this whole hillside in mulch about a year ago, and in some places it's probably more than 3 inches, in some places it might be a little less, but I think that's helped all of these trees. But this one in particular is a high value tree to me. So I spend a lot of time trying to nurture and protect this tree.
So from what I'm getting from talking with you, number one, trees are very valuable and very important.
Absolutely.
And number two, you need to experiment and watch and just pay attention to them. Absolutely. Don't just plant them and forget them.
Right. And you know, the thing that we need to make sure that our city managers understand is that trees are infrastructure.
Can you tell me, like, I have studied a little bit about tree valuation and have been terribly shocked at how much a mature tree is worth.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and so as infrastructure, it is the only infrastructure we have that gains value over time. So if you build a building, that's infrastructure, but that's going to depreciate over time. Right. If you plant a tree, that's infrastructure that gets more valuable over time. And the reason is because it will provide much more benefits for the city in terms of shade, in terms of asphalt protection, in terms of pollution reduction, and all these different things. The bigger that tree gets, the more of those benefits it provides for the city.
And the harder it is to replace because it's going to take decades to get a fully mature tree.
Exactly. So you put time and effort into a tree, and you're putting years of effort and growth and money and time, and that you just can't replace that instantly.
Yeah, so as we're talking about reducing water, as we're talking about changing out landscapes to be more Utah friendly, we need to talk about trees and how to take care of them.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for doing this. This is really vital, really important, and I don't see a lot of people talking about it.
Well, I appreciate you reaching out to me because it is something that we definitely need to talk about more. And there is a core group of people talking about it, but we've got to get that expanded to get more people talking about it.
I absolutely agree. And I hope all of you go out and look at your trees, do a little bit of testing. Look at the soil, see how deep you're watering, and evaluate your irrigation system. See how well you're watering.
Sure.
And make sure that that tree is not planted too deep, and see if there's anything you can do about it.
And if you have questions, reach out to your city forester. forester. Most
Yes.
cities have a city forester.
City forester, local arborist. Sometimes, you do need to watch the arborists you call, but most of them are really, really good.
Right. If you reach out to the Utah Community Forest Council, they do have a list of certified arborists for hire.
I'll link that below.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, hopefully you've enjoyed this video and it's been helpful. And if it has, please like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and go have a wonderful garden adventure.
Thank you.